I was wrong. Please come back. I am nothing without this family.
He packed one bag. Not two. Not a suitcase. One bag, the kind you take on a weekend trip. As if he was telling himself this wasn't permanent. As if some part of him already knew he might need to come back. He zipped it up slowly. Carried it down the stairs past the framed photos on the wall, his wedding day, his son's first birthday, his daughter missing her 2 front teeth and grinning like she'd won something, and he walked out the front door without saying goodbye to a single person in that house. His taillights disappeared down the street on a Tuesday night in March. And for 72 hours, he felt nothing but relief. Then his phone rang. And everything David Chen thought he had escaped came back with a force he was not prepared for. Not because his wife was screaming. Not because she was threatening him. But because of 4 words she said so quietly he almost didn't hear them. 4 words that would keep him awake, staring at a hotel ceiling, for the next 3 weeks. This is the story of a man who burned down 11 years of marriage in one night, and spent every single day afterward standing in the ash, wondering how he ever thought this was a good idea. Stay with me. Because by the time this story is over, you are going to question everything you think you know about loyalty, regret, and the exact moment a person realizes, too late, what they truly had. Before we go any further, I need you to sit with 3 questions. Why would a man with a stable career, a devoted wife, and 2 young children walk away from everything, for a woman he had known for less than 4 months? What happened inside those 72 hours that shattered every fantasy he had carefully built inside his head? And why, when his wife finally answered his call, did she say only 4 words before going completely silent? Keep those questions with you. We are going to answer every single one. But first you need to understand who these people were before everything fell apart. Because this story, like most of the ones that truly break us, did not begin the night he left. It began much earlier. In the silence between 2 people who had slowly, without ever meaning to, stopped telling each other the truth. David Chen was 44 years old and by almost every visible measure, a man who had his life completely together. He worked as a regional sales manager for a mid-sized logistics company out of Columbus, Ohio. He coached his son's Little League team on Saturday mornings without ever being asked twice. He remembered his mother-in-law's birthday every single year without a reminder, and he always picked up her favorite coffee cake when he visited. He was the kind of man his neighbors would describe without hesitation as solid. Dependable. A good guy. Nobody who knew David Chen would have seen this coming. And that, if you understand anything about how these stories work, was almost the entire problem. Because David wasn't falling apart on the outside. He was falling apart somewhere nobody could see. Quietly. Slowly. The way a house settles and cracks deep in its foundation long before anything visible gives way on the surface. For 2 years, David had been carrying something he had no real language for. A promotion that kept getting dangled and then quietly pulled back. A mortgage that expanded every time they thought they finally had breathing room. A life that looked exactly the way it was supposed to look from the outside, and felt, from the inside, like wearing shoes that were just slightly too small. Not unbearable. Just wrong. Every single day, just slightly wrong. Patricia was 42 years old. A pediatric nurse with 12 years inside one of Columbus's busiest children's hospitals. She was practical and warm and deeply, almost stubbornly loyal, the kind of woman who showed up. For her patients. For her children. For her marriage. Always. She had noticed the distance growing between them. Of course she had. Patricia was not a woman who missed things. But she told herself it was the stress of his job. She told herself it was a season, not a permanent condition. She told herself it would pass. And in the meantime, she poured herself into Marcus, who was 9 and already showing his father's quiet intensity. And into Lily, who was 6 and had recently decided that every single meal needed to be negotiated like an international peace treaty. Patricia loved her children the way good mothers do, completely, without reservation, and sometimes at the expense of everything else. Including, without fully realizing it, her marriage. She would say later that she knew something was wrong. She just could not bring herself to name it out loud. Because naming it would have made it real. And Patricia, for all her remarkable strength, was not ready for it to be real. So she kept moving forward. Kept showing up. Kept telling herself that what they had was enough, and that enough was something worth protecting. She had no idea that on a Tuesday night in March, the choice would be taken completely out of her hands. Renee was 31 years old. David had met her 8 months earlier at a regional sales conference in Cincinnati. She was sharp and easy to talk to and almost completely unburdened by the weight David carried with him everywhere he went. She asked David questions Patricia had stopped asking. Not because Patricia didn't care, but because after 11 years together, both of them had quietly stopped asking. Renee laughed at things Patricia was too exhausted at the end of a 12-hour nursing shift to find funny. She looked at David the way someone looks at a person who is still becoming something, not someone who has already arrived and is now simply maintaining what he built. David told himself it was just friendship. He told himself that every day for 4 months. There is a particular kind of lie a person tells themselves right before they make the worst decision of their entire life. It is quiet and patient and it sounds almost reasonable when you hear it inside your own head. And it almost always begins with the same words. It's not that serious. But in the 3rd week of March, David stopped lying to himself. And started making plans instead. It was a Tuesday. Not a Friday after a blowout fight. Not a Sunday after weeks of tension finally boiling over. A Tuesday, the most ordinary day of the week. Which is somehow always when the unordinary happens. Patricia was upstairs putting Lily to bed. Doing the thing Lily required every single night without exception, 3 songs, 2 stories, 1 glass of water, and a specific stuffed rabbit named Gerald placed at a precise angle beside her pillow. Marcus was at the kitchen table doing homework, his sneakers squeaking absently against the chair legs the way 9-year-old boys do when they are thinking about something else entirely. David went upstairs. He reached to the top shelf of the closet, the one Patricia used for extra blankets and things they didn't need often, and he pulled down a duffel bag. And he started filling it. Quietly. Methodically. The way a man fills a bag when he has been rehearsing this moment inside his head for a very long time. Patricia appeared in the doorway. She looked at the bag. She looked at him. And she asked very quietly what he was doing. David told her the truth. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't blame her. He didn't list her failures or defend his choices or perform the kind of dramatic exit that would have at least given her something solid to be angry at. He just said, "I can't do this anymore. I haven't been happy. I'm sorry." Patricia stood in the doorway of the bedroom they had shared for 9 years. And she did not cry. Not yet. She just looked at him for a long, steady moment. And she asked him one question. We are going to come back to that question. David picked up his bag. He walked past Marcus at the kitchen table, who looked up from his homework with an expression no 9-year-old should ever have to wear, and he walked out the front door. And just like that, 11 years was over. David drove to Renee's apartment on the west side of the city. And for the first 24 hours, David Chen felt something he had almost forgotten was possible. He felt light. The weight he had been carrying, the mortgage, the silence, the daily performance of being okay when he wasn't, it lifted. He sat in Renee's living room and he breathed differently. He slept differently. He woke up the next morning and for a few quiet hours, he was almost certain he had made the right choice. He told himself this was what happiness felt like. He told himself he had finally been honest for the first time in years. He told himself a lot of things in those first 24 hours. And then came day 2. He called Marcus to say goodnight. The phone rang 4 times before his son picked up. David told him he loved him. Told him he would see him soon. Asked if he had finished his homework. Marcus said, "Okay, Dad." That was it. "Okay, Dad." In a voice so flat, so careful, so completely emptied of the normal noise and chaos of a 9-year-old boy, that it didn't sound like his son at all. It sounded like a child who had been told something that day that he was still trying to figure out how to carry inside his small body. David set the phone down on Renee's coffee table. He stared at the ceiling for a long time. That night, he did not sleep. Day 3 was when everything David had imagined started showing its edges. Renee had not pretended any of this was simple. But on day 3, the questions started coming. Practical questions. Real questions. When was he planning to speak to a lawyer? What was the plan with the house? Had he told his mother yet? When could she meet his children? And David sat on the edge of her bed, this woman's bed, in this woman's apartment, surrounded by her life and her things and her expectations, and he felt something shift inside his chest. It was not love leaving. It was clarity arriving. Because Renee was not asking anything unreasonable. She was asking exactly the questions any woman asks when a man has told her that he chose her. But David heard those questions and felt, with a cold and quiet horror that moved through him slowly, that he had not escaped anything at all. He had not left his problems behind. He had simply relocated his unhappiness to a smaller apartment. The weight came back. Not Patricia's weight, not the mortgage, not the silence of a tired marriage. But his own weight. The thing inside him that had been wrong for 2 years. It had ridden in the duffel bag beside his clothes. It had sat with him at Renee's dinner table. And now it was sitting right beside him on the edge of her bed, looking at him without blinking. David Chen understood, in that moment, that he had made the worst mistake of his life. The only question that mattered now was whether it was already too late to undo it. He picked up his phone. He scrolled to Patricia's name and he sat there looking at it for longer than he would ever admit to anyone. And then he pressed call. She answered on the 3rd ring. David started talking immediately, stumbling and rushing the way people do when they have rehearsed something but emotion is moving faster than the words can keep up with. He told her he was sorry. He told her he had made a terrible mistake. He told her he wanted to come home. That he needed her to understand. That he knew he had absolutely no right to ask, but he was asking anyway. Patricia let him finish. Every single word. She did not interrupt. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She simply listened to all of it with the particular stillness of a woman who had spent 3 days deciding exactly who she was going to be when this moment arrived. And when David finally went quiet, Patricia spoke. 4 words. Don't come home yet. Not, don't ever come back. Not, it's over between us. Not, I hate you, lose my number forever. Just 4 quiet words that left every door slightly open and absolutely nothing certain. Don't come home yet. David said okay. And the line went silent. He checked into a hotel that night. And he would stay there for the next 3 weeks. Because those 4 words were simultaneously the most merciful thing Patricia had ever said to him and the most devastating, because they meant she had not decided. And not knowing was, in some ways, so much harder than a door being slammed completely shut. What David did not know, what he had absolutely no way of knowing, was what Patricia had been doing for those 3 days while he sat in Renee's apartment feeling light. She had not collapsed. She had not called her mother and spent 3 days crying on the phone. She had not sat in the dark eating her feelings or fallen apart in the ways we are told women fall apart when their husbands leave. On the first night, after she put both children to bed and the house went quiet, Patricia sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she never drank. And she made a decision about the kind of woman she was going to be on the other side of this. On the 2nd day, she called a family attorney. Not to file anything. Not yet. Just to understand exactly where she stood and what her options were. Because Patricia was a woman who needed information before she could move. And she was going to move deliberately, not in panic. On the third day, she pulled out a notebook she kept on her nightstand, the one she used to jot down notes about the kids, grocery lists, things she needed to remember, and she started writing. Not a letter to David. Not a list of his failures. Just her own feelings, written out long and honest, because she knew herself well enough to know she needed to say everything out loud before she could decide anything clearly. Patricia was not waiting for David to come back. She was deciding whether she wanted him to. Meanwhile, the children were carrying something neither of them had the words for. Marcus stopped talking at dinner. Not dramatically, he didn't slam doors or refuse to eat. He just went quiet in that particular way children go quiet when they are protecting the adults around them from how frightened they actually are. He did his homework every night. He put himself to bed. He was, at 9 years old, trying very hard to be easy. Lily started sleeping with all the lights on. And Marcus, who had not done this since he was 4 years old, started wetting the bed. Patricia said nothing to David about any of this for 2 full weeks. She handled it quietly, the way she handled everything. Extra patience at bedtime. Extra reassurance in the mornings. Extra gentleness in all the places that were suddenly tender. When she finally told David, 2 weeks later, his voice on the phone broke in a way she had never heard before in 11 years of marriage. Back at the hotel, David was discovering something else nobody had warned him about. Renee had stopped returning his calls. Not all at once. First the responses got slower. Then shorter. Then, by the end of the second week, they stopped coming altogether. The woman who had made David feel chosen, the woman he had blown up his entire life for, had quietly withdrawn the moment the fantasy required something real from her. Because here is the thing about relationships built in the space between someone else's life, they require the unavailability to survive. The moment David was fully available, fully present, fully hers, there was nothing left to want. Renee had not fallen in love with David Chin. She had fallen in love with the version of David that belonged to someone else. And that version no longer existed. David sat in his hotel room on a Thursday night, staring at a phone that was no longer ringing, and understood with complete clarity that he had left a woman who stayed, for a woman who left the moment things became real. The irony of that did not escape him. It kept him awake every night for 3 weeks. 6 weeks after David left, Patricia agreed to meet him. A diner on the east side of Columbus. Neutral ground. The kind of place with bad coffee and good lighting and enough background noise that 2 people can speak honestly without feeling exposed. David came with a letter he had written and rewritten 11 times. He left it in the car. When he sat down across from Patricia and saw her face, not angry, not devastated, just clear, he understood that no letter was going to cover what needed to be said between them. Patricia came with her notebook. She set it on the table between them and she told David that she was going to say everything in it out loud. And she did. Every feeling. Every fear. Every question she had written down in the dark of the kitchen while her children slept upstairs and her marriage sat in pieces around her. She did not perform any of it. She did not cry to make him feel worse, and she did not stay composed to seem stronger than she felt. She just told him the truth. And David listened. Really listened. In a way, Patricia would later say, that he had not listened to her in years. When she finished, David said, "I know." And then he said the only thing that mattered. "I am so sorry for what I put you and the children through. And I understand completely if that's not something you can come back from." Patricia looked at him for a long moment. And then she said something that surprised them both. She said, "The night you left, before you walked out the door, I asked you a question. Do you remember what it was?" David did not answer right away. And in that pause, his eyes filled. He remembered. She had asked him, "Is there anything I could have done differently?" And he had said, "No." And walked out anyway. Patricia nodded slowly. She said, I have spent 6 weeks thinking about that answer. And I think you were wrong. I think we both could have done things differently. And I think we were both too tired and too proud and too afraid to say so until it was almost too late. She closed the notebook. She said, almost. They did not reconcile that day in the diner. Patricia was not a woman who moved on feeling alone. She needed evidence. She needed time. She needed to watch David show up, not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but in the ordinary ways that actually matter. At pick-up and drop-off. At Marcus's games. At the kitchen table helping Lily negotiate the terms of eating her vegetables. She told David he could come back into their lives slowly, the way trust is rebuilt, not all at once, but in small, consistent, undeniable actions over time. They started counseling 3 weeks later. A therapist Patricia chose, in an office on the north side of Columbus, every Thursday at 6 in the evening. David did not miss a single session. Marcus stopped wetting the bed after the first month. Lily started turning her lights off to sleep again sometime in late spring. And David Chen, the man who had packed one bag and walked out on a Tuesday night believing he was finally free, spent the next year learning something he should have understood long before it cost him everything it did. That the life you have is not the enemy of the life you want. That the distance between two people in a marriage is not a sign that love is gone. It is a sign that both people stop doing the small, unglamorous, daily work of choosing each other. And that regret, real regret, the kind that sits in your chest and does not leave, is not a feeling that arrives when you lose something. It arrives the moment you understand exactly what it was worth. Patricia would say, in the months that followed, that the hardest part was not forgiving David. The hardest part was forgiving herself for seeing the signs and choosing not to name them. For pouring so much of herself into her children, beautifully, lovingly, with everything she had, that she had allowed her marriage to run dry without ever sounding the alarm. She does not say this with guilt. She says it with the particular clarity of a woman who has walked through fire and come out the other side knowing exactly who she is. David got what he thought he wanted. For exactly 72 hours. And Patricia, the woman he assumed would simply wait, the woman he thought he already knew everything about, turned out to be the one who had started moving forward before he ever asked to come back. Now here is what I want to know. When David called Patricia from that hotel room, should she have taken him back at all? There is no wrong answer. But I want to hear yours. Drop it in the comments right now, because this conversation is just getting started. Make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss our upcoming videos. Because the next one is going to leave you speechless.